The palace of the Dragon Emperor stood high above the clouds, built from black stone and shining metal that caught the light of the twin suns. Every sound inside the halls echoed softly, like whispers in a temple. Servants moved carefully, afraid to draw attention. Among them walked a small human maid named Lyra. Her steps were light, her head always bowed, her face calm but tired. No one really saw her. To most dragons, she was invisible. That morning, the air in the palace felt strange. The emperor sat on his throne of obsidian, his golden eyes sharp, his wings folded behind him like a storm waiting to break. He was known across the realms as the Flame of Order, powerful, wise, and merciless. Yet for some reason his gaze followed the small maid moving near his table. Lyra carried a tray with tea made from moon leaves, her hands shaking slightly as she poured it into a golden cup. "Leave it," the emperor said, his voice low but heavy with command. She bowed quickly, placing the cup down. Her sleeve slipped for a moment, and the emperor's eyes caught a glimpse of something dark on her skin, a bruise, deep and purple. He leaned forward, his nostrils flaring slightly, as if smelling the faint scent of blood. "What is that?" he asked, his voice echoing through the hall. Lyra froze, her hands trembling. "It's nothing, my lord," she whispered. Her voice was so soft it almost vanished into the silence. "Nothing," he repeated. The word rolled out like thunder. Every guard and servant nearby stopped breathing. Lyra quickly pulled her sleeve down. "Just an accident, Your Majesty. I fell in the kitchen." The emperor studied her face. She was lying. He could tell by the way her eyes refused to meet his. A dragon's senses could smell truth and fear like smoke from a fire. His tail flicked once against the stone floor, a sound like metal striking rock. He said nothing for a few moments. The tension was so thick that even the air seemed afraid to move. Finally, he waved a hand. "Leave us." The other servants bowed and hurried away, their wings brushing the floor as they left. Only Lyra remained, standing still as a statue, her tray shaking in her hands. "Who did this?" The emperor asked again, softer this time. She shook her head. "No one, my lord. Please, I don't want trouble." He rose slowly from his throne. The ground seemed to tremble with every step he took toward her. Lyra dared not look up, but she could feel the heat coming from his body. The emperor was massive, his presence filling the room. He lowered himself slightly, trying to see her face. "Look at me," he said quietly, her breath caught. She looked up just for a second, and he saw the fear in her eyes, deep, tired, and full of something else. Not fear of him, but of someone else. "You are human," he said, almost to himself. "You bleed easily, but this is not from a fall." She opened her mouth to speak, then stopped. Her lips trembled. "Please, my lord," she whispered, "don't ask." The emperor straightened, his expression unreadable. For a moment he said nothing. Then with a cold voice he called out, "Captain of the guard!" A tall dragon soldier appeared at once, armor gleaming. "Yes, my emperor." "Find out who touched her," the emperor said, his eyes still locked on Lyra. The guard blinked, surprised. "My lord?" "You heard me," the emperor said, his tone final. "Anyone who harms the humans under my roof answers to me." "Yes, my emperor," the guard said, and left quickly, the sound of his armor fading down the corridor. Lyra dropped to her knees. "Please," she cried softly, "don't do this. They'll think I told you. They'll hurt more people." The emperor's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "They will hurt no one again," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Tears formed in her eyes, but she wiped them quickly. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's not just me. What do you mean?" he asked. But she only shook her head and stood up slowly. Still trembling, "I must return to work," she said. "Not until I have answers," the emperor said. But she bowed and walked backward, her eyes down, whispering, "Forgive me, my lord." Then she turned and disappeared through the door. The emperor stood in silence for a long time after she left. His claws tapped slowly against the armrest of his throne. He could still see the bruise in his mind, not one, but several, hidden beneath her clothes. It stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt in centuries. Dragons did not care for humans. They were tools, servants, fragile things. But seeing her scars had awakened something buried deep. Anger, yes, but also guilt. He turned his gaze toward the high windows. Outside, the twin suns glowed red, and the clouds drifted like smoke over a burning world. He remembered wars long past, times when dragons ruled over humans with iron claws. He had thought those days were over. Maybe he was wrong. The sound of soft footsteps came again. His advisor, a silver-scaled dragon named Kyle, entered quietly. "My Emperor," Kyle said, bowing, "you seem troubled." The Emperor's voice was low. "There are humans in my palace being harmed." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Humans harm themselves, my lord. It is their way." The Emperor's tail twitched. "This one bore marks no one gives themselves." Kyle sighed. "They are fragile creatures." Perhaps she slipped. Perhaps another servant was careless. "Is it worth your concern?" The Emperor looked at him, and Kyle felt the heat in the air rise. "Everything that happens under my roof is my concern," he said. Kyle bowed quickly. "As you command." When he was alone again, the Emperor walked slowly down the hall, his heavy steps echoing in the silence. He stopped at the window overlooking the servants' quarters far below. Small human figures moved like shadows, their heads low, their hands busy with endless work. He watched them for a long time. Somewhere down there was the maid with the bruises, the one who had lied to him out of fear. He didn't know why it bothered him so much. Perhaps because she looked so fragile, yet still moved with quiet strength. Perhaps because she did not cry until he forced her to. Or maybe because, for the first time in a long while, someone in his palace had looked at him not with awe, but with silent plea. The twin suns began to set, turning the palace gold and red. The Emperor turned away from the window and walked back toward his throne. His voice, when he spoke to the empty room, was quiet but full of power. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will have the truth." And far below, in the dark servants' halls, Lyra sat alone, her arms wrapped around herself. The bruise on her arm throbbed, but the pain in her heart was worse. She whispered softly to no one. He should have never seen it. The wind outside howled like a living thing, carrying her words into the night. Somewhere in the palace, the Emperor could not sleep. The image of those bruises haunted him, not just because of what they meant, but because deep down he already knew. Someone close to him was hiding something terrible, and before long the whole palace would burn with the truth. The palace felt different after that day. The air itself carried tension, like a storm hiding behind calm clouds. Servants spoke in low whispers, afraid that every word might reach the wrong ears. The Dragon Emperor's command still echoed through the halls. "Find out who touched her." Everyone had heard it, and now everyone feared it. Lyra moved quietly between her duties, keeping her head down. She tried to act normal, but her hands trembled when she worked. She knew the Emperor's order had started something dangerous. Someone would be punished soon, and she feared who it might be. In the palace, even justice could burn. The guards watched her now. She could feel their eyes on her every time she passed. Their stares were not kind. Some were full of anger, others of suspicion. She wanted to disappear. Meanwhile, in the upper halls, the Emperor stood on his balcony, looking down at the city below. Smoke rose from the distant factories, where humans worked day and night. He thought about the maid, Lyra. Her bruises were burned into his mind. He couldn't forget the look in her eyes, that mix of fear and quiet strength. Kyle, his silver-scaled advisor, entered behind him. "You called for me, my Emperor?" The Emperor did not turn. "What have you learned about the human maid?" Kyle hesitated. "Nothing unusual, my lord. She is one of many brought here after the Southern Wars. She has no family, no record of rebellion." The Emperor's golden eyes narrowed. "And the bruises." Kyle's wings shifted slightly. "Accidents, perhaps? The humans are clumsy. They bruise easily." The Emperor's gaze turned toward him, cold, sharp. "You know that is not true." Kyle bowed his head. "Forgive me, my Emperor. I will investigate further." "Do so quietly," the Emperor said. "I want the truth, not excuses." Kyle nodded and left. But as he walked down the corridor, his expression changed. He muttered under his breath, "He risks too much for a human." Below, in the servant quarters, Lyra tried to stay out of sight. Her best friend, Mira, another human servant, whispered to her while they cleaned the crystal floors. "What did he say to you?" "Everyone is talking," Lyra kept her voice low. "He asked who hurt me. And you told him?" Mira's eyes widened. Lyra shook her head quickly. "No, if I speak they'll make others pay. You know how it works here," Mira sighed. "Then pray he forgets." But Lyra knew he wouldn't. The Emperor's eyes had burned with something fierce, not pity, not simple anger. It was deeper. She had seen it only once before, in a human commander's eyes long ago, just before he died protecting his soldiers. That night, Lyra stayed late in the great hall, polishing the glass pillars. The palace was quiet, the torches dim. She hummed softly to herself, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Then she heard footsteps, slow, heavy. She turned. The Emperor stood at the doorway, her breath caught. "My lord," she whispered, bowing quickly. He walked closer, his shadow stretching long across the marble floor. "You work late." "Yes, my lord," she said softly. "The floors must be finished before dawn." He looked at her hands, thin, bruised again. "You are hurt." "It's nothing," she said quickly. He studied her for a moment, then said, "You fear me." Lyra shook her head. "No, my lord," but her voice trembled. "You lie poorly," he said, a hint of sadness in his tone. "I do not harm those who serve with honesty. So tell me, who did this?" Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. "Please, you must stop asking. They will hear. They always hear," the Emperor frowned. "Who will hear?" She pressed her lips together. The silence stretched. Finally she whispered, "The guards, the ones below the East Tower. They punish those who speak too much." His wings twitched slightly. "Why?" "Because," she said, her voice breaking, "some humans tried to escape last winter. They were caught. Since then, the guards have made examples of us. Every week, someone is beaten. Sometimes they vanish." The Emperor's claws tightened against the railing. "And you said nothing." Lyra gave a small, sad smile. "No one listens to humans, my lord. Not even the kind ones." For a long moment he said nothing. The only sound was the soft hiss of torches. Finally he spoke. "You will not go to the lower halls again. From now on you work here, under my watch." Her eyes widened. "My lord, that will anger them." "Good," he said simply. "Let them be angry." She shook her head. "They will come for me. They will come for no one," the Emperor said, turning away. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet fire. When he left, Lyra sank to the floor, her hands covering her face. She did not know whether to feel safe or doomed. The next morning, rumors spread faster than wind. "The Emperor protects a human," the guards whispered. Some laughed, others looked nervous. One of the captains, a cruel dragon named Varrock, smashed a spear against the wall. "He forgets what humans are," Varrock growled. "They are weak. They are slaves. And if he sides with them, he sides against us." That evening, Kale met Varrock in the training yard. The air smelled of iron and smoke. "You heard his order?" Kyle asked quietly. "I did," Varrock said, his tail lashing. "He's losing his edge. Too many years of peace have softened him." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "Do nothing foolish," Varrock smiled with sharp teeth. "Foolish? I only protect the throne. If he won't act, others will." That night the Emperor couldn't sleep. He stood by the window again, staring into the darkness below. The palace felt wrong, too quiet, too still. He could sense the tension crawling through the walls. He thought about Lyra's words. The guards in the East Tower, punishments, disappearances. He had ruled for centuries and thought he knew everything that happened under his command. Now he realized how blind he'd been. He turned toward the shadows and said softly, "Kyle." The silver dragon appeared from the darkness. "My Emperor, tell the guards to stay away from the East Tower tonight," the Emperor ordered. "No patrols, no movement." Kyle tilted his head. "May I ask why, my lord?" The Emperor's eyes glowed faintly. "Because I will go there myself," Kyle hesitated. "That is not safe." The Emperor's wings unfolded slightly, spreading a wave of heat through the room. "Safe is not my concern." "Truth is," Kyle bowed, "as you wish." When the Emperor left his chamber, the palace corridors were silent. The torches flickered as he passed, his shadow stretching along the walls. Far below, deep beneath the marble floors, he could already feel the pulse of something dark. Fear, pain, and hidden guilt. Lyra, awake in her small room, felt the same unease. She whispered to herself, "He's going there, isn't he?" and looked toward the window where the twin moons hung like watchful eyes. In the distance, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the lower halls, each one bringing the Emperor closer to the truth that would change everything. The night held its breath. The palace waited, and the Dragon Emperor was about to see what had been hidden from him for far too long. The lower halls of the palace were nothing like the shining upper chambers. Here the air was cold and heavy. The torches burned weakly, their light trembling against walls made of rough black stone. The Emperor moved silently, each step echoing down the narrow corridor. He had dismissed his guards and walked alone, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. He had ruled for centuries, but he had never been this far below his own palace. The scent of metal and dust filled his nose. He followed the faint sound of chains, the kind of sound that should not exist in a royal home. The deeper he went, the colder it became, until even his fire could not warm the air. At the end of the corridor stood a heavy iron door. It was covered in rust, something rare in a place ruled by dragons. He placed his hand against it. The metal was warm. Someone had been here recently. He pushed it open. Inside was darkness. Then slowly his eyes adjusted. What he saw made his blood boil. There were cells carved into the walls, small, filthy cages with humans inside. Some were sleeping, others staring blankly ahead. Their bodies were thin, covered with scars and bruises. The smell of fear and sickness filled the air. When the humans saw him, they shrank back, afraid. They thought another punishment was coming. The Emperor's claws dug into the stone floor. "Who ordered this?" he whispered. His voice was quiet, but the power in it made the walls tremble. One of the guards stepped out from the shadows. It was Varrock, the captain who had mocked him earlier that day. His black scales gleamed even in the dim light. "My lord," Varrock said, bowing slightly, "you should not be here." "Answer me," the Emperor said. "Who built these cages?" Varrock smiled faintly. "We only followed old law, my Emperor. These humans disobeyed orders. They stole food, they slowed work. Punishment keeps them loyal." The Emperor's wings shifted, brushing the ceiling. "You torture them." "It is discipline," Varrock said, his tone calm. "Without fear, they forget their place." "Fear is not loyalty," the Emperor said. "It is rot. And I will not rule a kingdom that feeds on rot." Varrock took a step closer, his tail swaying. "Forgive me, but you have grown soft, my Emperor. The humans are tools. If they break, we replace them. Why care for the weak?" The Emperor's eyes burned like fire. "Because strength is not cruelty." Varrock's expression darkened. "You have forgotten what dragons are, and you," the Emperor said slowly, "have forgotten what I am." Before Varrock could answer, the Emperor's power flared. The ground shook. Flames burst from his body, painting the walls red and gold. The chains melted. The humans screamed and covered their faces, afraid the fire would reach them. But it didn't. The heat passed over them harmlessly, as if guided by will. Varrock raised his arms to shield himself. "My lord, stop! You'll destroy everything." The Emperor's voice roared through the chamber. "Everything built on suffering deserves to burn." With a single strike of his claw, he shattered the iron door, letting fresh air flood into the dungeon. The humans gasped, some crying openly for the first time in years. Varrock stumbled back. "You'll bring ruin on yourself. The council will not stand for this." "Then they can stand before me," the Emperor said. His voice was quiet again, but colder than before. He turned toward the humans. "Go, you are free." They hesitated, too afraid to believe it. Lyra stepped forward from the shadows. She had followed him, unable to sleep after feeling that strange pull in her heart. "It's true," she said softly to the others. "He means it. Go." The humans looked at her, then at the Emperor. Slowly they began to move. Some limped, others helped each other walk. The sound of their chains falling echoed like broken thunder. The Emperor watched them pass, his jaw tight. He could see the fear in their eyes, the way they flinched when he moved. He wanted to speak, to tell them they were safe now, but he knew words could not erase what had been done. When the last of them had gone, he turned to Lyra. "You followed me," he said quietly. "I had to," she said. "I was afraid you'd be killed down here." He almost smiled. "Killed? No, but I did not expect to find this." She looked around the dark hall. "It's worse than I thought," he nodded. "I trusted them. My guards, my council, my laws. And all this time they hid this from me." She met his eyes. "Now that you know, what will you do?" He turned away. "What must be done?" Varrock, still standing near the wall, sneered. "You'll regret this, Mercy. The council will call you weak." The Emperor looked back at him. "Let them. I'd rather be weak than blind." Varrock's tail lashed the floor. "Then you are no true dragon." The Emperor stepped closer until their faces were inches apart. "Then perhaps it's time dragons remember what true means," Varrock hissed, his body glowing with inner flame. But before he could strike, the Emperor raised a hand. The air itself grew heavy. Varrock froze, not by choice, but by power. The Emperor's eyes glowed brighter. "You will speak to no one of this," he said. "You will release all humans in your care. If any vanish again, I will know." Varrock struggled to move but couldn't. "And if I refuse?" The Emperor's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then I will burn your name from history." The flames around Varrock flickered out. He lowered his head in silent rage. "As you command." When the Emperor released him, Varrock fled up the stairs, his footsteps echoing behind him. Lyra watched him go, worry clouding her face. "He'll tell others," she said. "I know," the Emperor said. "Let him. The truth must rise, even if it burns the palace." Lyra stepped closer. "You risk everything for us." He looked at her for a long moment. "You risked more by surviving this long." They walked together back through the corridor. As they reached the upper levels, the first light of dawn broke through the windows, painting the walls gold. The Emperor stopped and looked at it. "For the first time in years," he said quietly, "the palace smells like air, not smoke." Lyra smiled faintly, though fear still lingered in her heart. "They won't forgive you for this," she said. He nodded. "They don't have to. I didn't do it for forgiveness." As he walked toward the throne room, his steps were calm but heavy. The palace would soon wake to the news that the Dragon Emperor had freed the humans from the dungeons. The council would be furious. The guards would whisper rebellion. But the Emperor no longer cared. Behind him, Lyra watched silently, knowing that the real battle had only just begun. Far away, in the upper towers, Varrock reached Kael's chamber. "He destroyed the lower cells," Varrock said, his voice trembling with anger. "He freed them. The Emperor has lost his mind." Kael turned from the window, his silver eyes cold. "Then perhaps it is time," he said softly. "The throne must be reminded who it truly belongs to." And as the morning sun rose over the palace, a quiet war began. One not of armies, but of hearts, loyalty, and flame. The morning light filled the throne room with gold and shadow. The Emperor sat on his throne, silent, his face unreadable. Around him stood the royal council, 6 dragons of ancient power, their scales shining in different shades of fire, frost, and iron. The air felt thick with tension. Kael stood among them, calm as always, though his eyes held a strange gleam. Varrock stood near the back, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the floor. None dared speak first. They all waited for the Emperor. Finally, the Emperor rose. His wings spread slightly, casting long shadows across the marble floor. "You all know what I found last night," he said, his voice cold but steady. "Humans locked in cages beneath this palace," the council murmured among themselves, pretending to be surprised. Kael stepped forward, bowing. "My Emperor, we understand your concern. But those cells were created long ago, before your reign. Old rules still guide the lower guards." "Old rules," the Emperor repeated softly. "Old rules that allow cruelty." Kael's tone remained calm. "Discipline, not cruelty. Humans must be reminded of their place. Without fear, they become dangerous." The Emperor's tail hit the ground with a loud crack. "Fear is not order. It is poison." The council fell silent. His golden eyes burned brighter than ever. "From this day," he said, "no human in my kingdom will live as a slave. They will work with fair reward and protection." Any dragon who harms them will answer to me." The room erupted in protest. One councillor hissed, "You break our ancient law." Another shouted, "Humans are beneath us." The emperor raised his voice, and the hall shook. "Enough." The sound froze every dragon where they stood. "Ancient law built this empire," the emperor said, "but mercy will keep it alive. If you cannot see that, then you are the ones who have forgotten what it means to rule." Kyle bowed slowly, his eyes still cold. "Your Majesty, your compassion is noble. But if you protect the humans, others will see it as weakness. The neighboring kingdoms will sense blood in the water. Are you ready to risk war? For them?" The emperor stared at him. "If war comes because of mercy, then let it come." Kyle said nothing more, but his silence was heavier than words. When the meeting ended, the council left with stiff wings and quiet rage. Varrock glared back once before following the others. Kyle stayed behind, his tone calm but sharp. "My emperor, I will obey your will, but I must warn you, you've made powerful enemies today." The emperor looked down at him. "Then let them stand before me. I will not kneel to cruelty." Kyle bowed and walked out, his tail flicking once, a small sign of anger. When the doors closed, the emperor finally let out a slow breath. He felt the weight of centuries pressing on his shoulders. He had ruled through wars, plagues, and rebellions, but this quiet rebellion inside his own palace, felt different. He turned when he heard a soft knock. "Enter," he said. Lyra stepped inside, her eyes low. She wore clean clothes now, but her hand still shook slightly. "You sent for me, my lord?" "Yes," he said. "Sit," she hesitated. "I shouldn't. Humans don't sit in the throne hall." He frowned. "And who decided that?" She looked confused. It's just the rule. Then it's a bad rule," he said. "Sit." Slowly she obeyed, sitting at the edge of the steps leading to the throne. Her presence seemed to soften the grand, cold hall. The emperor looked at her, studying the faint marks still visible on her wrists. "Do they still hurt?" She shook her head. "Not much." He paused for a moment, then asked, "Why didn't you tell me before?" "About the cages." "Because," she said quietly, "I didn't think it mattered. For years, humans tried to ask for help. We were told dragons don't care. And most of them didn't." He nodded slowly. "You thought I was the same." She met his eyes. "You are different. But I don't know why." He looked toward the windows, where sunlight poured through the golden glass. "Once long ago, dragons ruled everything by fire. We thought power meant control. But every flame leaves ashes. Maybe it's time I learned from the ashes instead." Lyra looked down. "The others don't see it that way. The guards, they're angry. They say you've forgotten what you are." He gave a small, cold smile. "Let them be angry. Their anger shows I'm doing something right." She hesitated before speaking again. "They might try to hurt me again. Or the others." The emperor stood, his wings spreading wide. "Then they will face me." Lyra looked up at him, not with fear this time, but with something close to respect. "Why do you care so much, my lord? Humans have always been beneath your kind." He looked down at her, his eyes softer now. "Because no one should be beneath another. Not in chains, not in fear." The moment hung in silence. For the first time, Lyra felt something in the palace she hadn't felt in years. Safety. A guard rushed in suddenly, bowing low. "My emperor." There is unrest among the soldiers. They say freeing the humans is an insult to dragon honor. The emperor's expression hardened. "Tell them their honor has become arrogance." "I will speak to them myself." The guard hesitated. "My lord, some are refusing your orders." The emperor's eyes flashed. "Then they will remember who commands this throne." After the guard left, Lyra rose quickly. "Please, be careful. They hate humans. They might—" He stopped her with a raised hand. "Lyra, do not fear for me. Fear for them." As he walked toward the courtyard, she followed from a distance, her heart pounding. Outside, hundreds of dragon soldiers stood in formation, their armor glinting under the sun. The moment they saw him, the noise stopped. The emperor's voice carried across the courtyard. "I hear some of you question my command." A murmur ran through the ranks. Varrock stepped forward, his voice loud. "We question your wisdom, my emperor. Dragons should not kneel to humans." I kneel to no one, the Emperor said, his voice like rolling thunder. But I will not stand by while my people become monsters. Varrock spread his wings. Then you are no longer fit to lead us. The courtyard fell silent. Every dragon held their breath. The Emperor looked at him calmly. Do you challenge me, Varrock? Varrock smiled darkly. If I must. Flames danced between them, the air crackling with heat. But before Varrock could move, the Emperor spoke again, his tone deadly quiet. Then understand this. My fire does not burn for pride. It burns for justice. And if that makes me unfit, then may every dragon who agrees with you burn beside your pride. No one spoke. Varrock's eyes flickered with fear, then rage. He bowed his head slightly and stepped back. The Emperor turned to the crowd. Go back to your posts. The age of cruelty ends today. The soldiers obeyed, uneasy but silent. When he turned, Lyra stood in the doorway watching. She had seen the fire in his eyes, the strength in his voice. For the first time, she truly believed the stories whispered among the humans, that even the greatest dragons could have hearts strong enough to change. That night, as the palace grew quiet again, Kale sat alone in his chamber, staring at the glowing map of the Empire. He's lost them, Kyle said softly. Varrock stood beside him, silent and bitter. Kyle's claws tapped the table. He stands with humans now. That means he stands against us, Varrock growled. So what do? Kyle's cold eyes lifted. We remind the Emperor that mercy has a price. Outside, thunder rumbled over the horizon. Lyra looked out from her small window, sensing danger she could not name. Somewhere deep inside the palace, power and betrayal began to move like unseen fire, and soon the Emperor would have to face a choice that could either save or destroy his kingdom. Night fell heavy over the Dragon Palace. The sky glowed faintly red, not from the sunset, but from fires burning in the lower city. The air smelled of smoke and fear. The Emperor stood on his balcony, wings half open, staring into the distance. His kingdom was trembling, and he could feel it in every stone beneath his claws. He had given an order of mercy, and in return his people had given him silence and rebellion. Lyra hurried into the chamber, her face pale. "My lord," she said breathlessly, "there are riots near the barracks. The guards are fighting each other. Some protect the humans, others want them dead." The Emperor turned his gaze toward her. "Where are Kale and Varrock?" "No one has seen them since sunset," she said. "The soldiers say Kale's banner was raised in the eastern courtyard." His eyes darkened. "Then it begins." He took his sword from the wall, a weapon made from the bone of the first Dragon King, glowing faintly with golden fire. "Stay inside, Lyra. Lock the doors. Do not open them for anyone but me." "But no," he said firmly. "This fight is between dragons." She wanted to argue, but his tone left no space for words. She nodded slowly, her hands trembling. "Please come back," she whispered. He gave her a small, almost human smile. "I always do." Then he was gone, wings unfolding in a burst of wind and flame. The courtyard was chaos. Soldiers clashed in the torchlight, steel against scales, flame against flame. The air roared with battle cries and the sound of wings beating through smoke. At the center stood Kale, his silver scales gleaming like a blade. Varrock was beside him, his crimson armor cracked but defiant. Kyle's voice carried over the noise. "The Emperor has forgotten who we are. He protects humans and shames dragons. Will you bow to weakness?" Hundreds of soldiers roared in response. The Emperor landed on the marble steps, his wings spreading wide, sending a wave of dust and smoke through the air. "You call compassion weakness," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Then you've never known true strength." Kyle stepped forward, calm as ever. "Strength is power, order, fear. The world bows to those who take what they want." "Then the world is broken," the Emperor replied. Kyle smiled faintly. "Then I'll break it again." The two dragons faced each other, fire building between their teeth. The ground cracked under the heat. Then in a flash they collided. The courtyard exploded with light and sound. Kale's silver flame met the Emperor's golden fire, creating a shockwave that threw soldiers backward. Varrock charged, but the Emperor swung his tail, sending him crashing into the stone wall. The other dragons hesitated. No one wanted to face the Emperor's wrath directly. Kale moved fast, faster than anyone expected. His claws slashed across the Emperor's chest, leaving glowing marks. The Emperor staggered back but didn't fall. His fire burned brighter now, not from rage, but from resolve. "You talk about fear," the Emperor growled. "Let me show you what it means to stand against a heart that burns for justice." He unleashed his flame. Golden fire swallowed the courtyard, consuming Kale's banners, the smoke, the doubt. The soldiers shielded their eyes from the blinding light. Kale roared, fighting back with every ounce of power he had. For a moment it looked like neither would win, but then Kale faltered. His silver flame flickered. The Emperor struck, knocking him to the ground. Kyle coughed, smoke rising from his wounds. "You would destroy your own kind for them?" The Emperor stood over him. "No, I destroy corruption, whatever form it takes." Kyle glared up at him. "Then you're no emperor. You're a fool." "Maybe," the Emperor said softly, "but at least I can look at my reflection and see something worth being." Kyle's strength finally gave out. His head dropped, eyes closing as the golden fire faded around him. The soldiers stood in stunned silence. Varrock, bleeding but alive, dragged himself up. "He's gone mad," he shouted. "He'll burn us all for humans." The Emperor turned his eyes toward him. "No, I will burn only the hate that blinds you." Varrock lunged forward, a desperate final act. The Emperor moved like lightning. His sword flashed once, and then Varrock fell, motionless. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Slowly, one by one, the soldiers knelt. Not out of fear, but something deeper. Respect. The Emperor stood tall, breathing heavily. His golden armor cracked and blackened. "This ends now," he said. "No more blood for pride. No more chains for power." Hours later, the fires were put out. The palace was quiet again, though the air still smelled of ash. The Emperor returned to his chambers, his steps slow. When he opened the door, Lyra ran to him, her eyes wide. "You're hurt," she said. He smiled faintly. "It's nothing," but she saw the cracks in his armor, the burns on his scales. "You shouldn't have to fight alone." He looked at her, weary but proud. "Sometimes being emperor means standing alone." She shook her head. "Not anymore." He looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "There are humans out there who would fight for you. Because you fought for us." He smiled softly, lowering himself to her level. "Then maybe this is the beginning of something new." Outside, the first light of dawn broke through the smoke-filled sky. The fires were gone, but their warmth remained. A new kind of flame, one that would not destroy but rebuild far away. Deep in the shadows of the mountains, something else stirred, eyes watching, waiting. The war within the palace might have ended, but a greater danger was already waking. The Emperor didn't know it yet, but mercy had made him not just a ruler. It had made him a target. Dark clouds hung over the dragon palace like a warning. Days had passed since the battle, but peace still felt fragile, like a thin glass ready to break at the slightest sound. The fires in the lower city were gone, yet the air still carried the smell of smoke and fear. The Emperor stood before the great window of his war chamber, watching the horizon. His armor was repaired, his wounds slowly healing, but inside he felt no rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Kale's cold gaze before the fall, and the silence that followed. Lyra entered quietly, carrying a tray with a bowl of warm broth. "You haven't eaten, my lord," she said softly. He didn't turn. "I will eat later." She set the tray down on the table. "Later never comes with you," she said, almost smiling. He looked at her then, just for a moment, and sighed. "You are brave to speak to me like that." "I was never brave," she said. "But after what you did, I want to try." He gave a faint smile but said nothing. The wind rattled the windows, and in the distance, thunder echoed over the mountains. Suddenly, the door burst open. General Orion, a loyal dragon whose scales were a deep shade of bronze, bowed quickly. "My Emperor, scouts have returned from the eastern border. They found movement, an army gathering beyond the ridge." The Emperor straightened. "Whose banners?" Orion's face darkened. Kyle's sigil, but twisted. Black flame, crimson eyes. It's not just dragons anymore. Something else fights with them. Lyra's eyes widened. Humans? Orion shook his head. No, not humans. Something darker. Shadows that move without form. The scouts say they heard voices, like whispers in their minds. The Emperor's golden eyes narrowed. Sorcery, he muttered. Old magic, Orion nodded grimly. Yes, and they move fast. If they reach the valley, they'll cut off the capital. The Emperor turned toward the map on the table. His claws traced the lines of mountains and rivers, glowing faintly under the lantern light. Kyle was too clever to fall so easily, he said. He planned something. His death was only the beginning. Lyra stepped closer. What if someone else controls him? Those shadows? They sound alive! The Emperor looked at her sharply. You may be right. The old texts spoke of creatures born from the void, spirits that feed on hate and fear. They were sealed centuries ago. Then who broke the seal? Orion asked. The Emperor's expression turned grim. Someone with power and purpose. That night, the palace was restless. Guards doubled their patrols. The humans who worked in the palace whispered prayers. Lyra walked the quiet halls uneasy. Every sound made her turn. As she reached the library, she noticed a faint glow coming from beneath the door. Curiosity pulled her closer. She pushed it open slowly and froze. Inside, a hooded figure stood before a floating shard of light. The glow pulsed like a heartbeat. The figure whispered in a low, unfamiliar tongue. Lyra gasped softly. The figure turned sharply. Who's there? She backed away, heart pounding. The hood fell slightly, revealing silver scales. Kyle, she whispered, but it wasn't Kale. His eyes were darker now, black, swirling with smoke. His voice was hollow. The Emperor should have let me die. But death doesn't matter when the shadows promise eternity. He stepped closer, his presence radiating cold. You should not have come here, human. Lyra turned and ran. Her feet echoed down the corridor. Kyle's voice followed her, deep and sharp, echoing inside her mind rather than her ears. You cannot hide him from me. The Fire King will burn, and the shadows will rule. She burst into the throne room, gasping for air. My lord, he's alive! Kale, he's here! The Emperor stood instantly. Where? The library. He's different. His eyes... Before she could finish, a tremor shook the ground. The torches flickered and went out. The air grew cold, unnatural. From the dark corridor, Kyle appeared, his form half solid, half shadow. Black flame licked around him. His voice was no longer his own. You cannot stop the void, old friend. The Emperor's claws tightened on his sword. You gave yourself to darkness. Kyle laughed, the sound twisted and hollow. I gave myself to power. The shadows only asked for one thing in return. Your soul. The Emperor's wings flared, golden fire igniting along his scales. Then come take it. Kyle raised his hand, and the air split apart. Dark shapes poured from the cracks, ghostly forms with burning red eyes. The throne room filled with screams and chaos. Lyra hid behind a fallen pillar, clutching the edge as black wind swirled around her. The Emperor's roar shook the palace. His golden fire met the black flame head-on, turning the entire hall into a storm of light and shadow. Kyle shouted over the roar, You cannot win! The void has no end! The Emperor's eyes blazed like suns. Then I will become its end. He drove his sword through the heart of the shadow storm. The explosion of light was blinding. When the smoke cleared, Kyle was gone. Only ashes remained, but the Emperor fell to one knee, exhausted. The walls cracked, dust falling from the ceiling. Lyra rushed to him, fear in her eyes. My lord, are you hurt? He shook his head weakly. Not yet. But as he looked toward the shattered portal, he saw something move in the darkness beyond, something vast and ancient watching him. The shadows whispered faint but clear, the war has only begun. The wind howled over the dragon palace. The night sky was red with fire, and the stars seemed to vanish behind clouds of shadow. The war had come. Far beyond the palace walls the valley burned. The black armies of the void, twisted creatures born from hate and smoke, marched toward the capital. Their leader was no longer Kyle, but something far worse. a being wearing Kyle's shape, his eyes empty and his voice filled with the whispers of the void. Inside the throne hall, the Emperor stood in full armor, the gold of his scales dim under the torchlight. Lyra stood beside him, pale but unflinching. Around them, the last loyal dragons prepared for battle. The air was thick with tension and fear. General Orion bowed. "The Shadow Army will reach the city gates within the hour. There are too many, my lord." The Emperor's gaze was steady. "Numbers do not win battles. Courage does." Lyra looked up at him. "But courage won't stop them alone. You saw what they are, shadows that can't be killed." The Emperor placed a clawed hand on her shoulder. "Then I'll find a way to end what should never have been born." Outside, thunder cracked. The ground trembled. The war had begun. The first wave of darkness struck the palace walls like a storm. Black shapes climbed over the ramparts, claws scraping against the stone. Their eyes glowed like fireflies in a nightmare. The dragons fought fiercely. Fire rained from the sky, golden and red, lighting up the dark valley. The sound of wings, roars, and shattering stone filled the air, but for every shadow burned, two more rose from the ashes. On the highest tower, the Emperor stood, wings spread wide. His fire cut through the darkness like the sun breaking the night. But the void only laughed. Kyle's voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "Even you, Emperor, cannot burn what has no life." The Emperor roared, and his flame burst brighter. "Then I'll burn until there's nothing left to rise again." Below, Lyra watched in horror as the battlefield turned into a storm of light and shadow. She ran toward the library, the same place where Kyle had opened the portal. Maybe, she thought, if she could find what caused it, she could stop it. Inside the ruined library, she searched through the broken scrolls and glowing stones. Finally, she found an old book, still pulsing faintly with light. The title was written in ancient runes, but one word stood out: balance. Her eyes widened. She began to read aloud, the words trembling on her lips. "The void cannot exist without fire. To end one, both must meet, one heart of flame, one heart of light." Her breath caught. One heart of flame. She turned toward the window, where the Emperor's golden light still blazed against the black sky. High above the battlefield, Kyle's shadow form rose from the smoke, wings made of pure darkness. He faced the Emperor once more. "You could have ruled the stars," he hissed. "Instead, you protect weak creatures who fear you." The Emperor's eyes glowed. "Power without mercy is nothing. You once knew that, Kyle." Kyle laughed bitterly. "I am beyond mercy now." Their fires met again, gold against black, shaking the heavens. Lightning cracked, splitting the mountain peaks. The void screamed, and dragons and humans below fell to their knees from the force. Lyra climbed the stairs to the tower, clutching the glowing book. She could barely breathe in the heat. "My lord!" she shouted. "I know how to end it." The Emperor turned, still holding Kyle's attack at bay. "Tell me!" "You have to join with the light. The book says your fire alone isn't enough. It needs balance." He understood instantly. "The Heartstone," he said quietly. At the center of the palace, deep beneath the throne, was the Heartstone, a glowing crystal that held the soul of the first Dragon King. Its power came from both fire and light, but to use it, one had to give something in return. The Emperor looked down at Lyra, his expression softening. "If I use the Heartstone, I may not survive." She shook her head fiercely. "You can't let them win." He smiled sadly. "You sound like a queen already." Before she could reply, Kyle lunged forward, slamming into him. They crashed through the tower, stone shattering around them. The Emperor barely caught his balance, fire roaring from his claws. "You can't save them all," Kyle shouted. "Maybe not," the Emperor said, "but I can save what matters." With one final burst of power, he flew upward, breaking through the clouds. The palace glowed below like a dying star. Lyra ran after him, shouting his name, but he was already gone, a streak of golden fire against the darkness. At the Heartstone chamber, the Emperor landed heavily. The crystal pulsed with blinding light, humming like a heartbeat. He placed his claw upon it. The room filled with golden energy. The void screamed in anger above the city. Kyle appeared again, breaking through the ceiling, his wings made of black smoke. "You'll destroy everything!" The Emperor looked at him with calm eyes. "No, I'll set it free." He pressed his palm against the Heartstone. Light exploded outward, pure and endless. The shockwave tore through the entire palace, washing over the valley. The Black Army burned away into dust. The shadows vanished, their screams fading into the wind. Kyle's form flickered. For a moment, his real eyes returned, clear and silver. "I'm sorry," he whispered, before fading completely into light. When the brilliance faded, the battlefield was silent. The dragons and humans looked to the sky, where the clouds cleared and the dawn finally broke. But the Emperor was gone. Only the Heartstone remained, glowing gently, its light no longer gold, but warm and white, as if holding something alive within it. Lyra fell to her knees beside it, tears in her eyes. She touched the stone, and for a brief moment she heard his voice, soft, steady, and full of warmth. "Do not mourn me, little one. The flame never dies, it only changes form. Protect them, both dragon and human. That is my final command." She smiled through her tears. "I will, my Emperor." Years later, the kingdom changed. Dragons and humans lived side by side. The palace was rebuilt, not as a place of fear, but of hope. And at the heart of it all stood the Heartstone, still glowing softly. Some said on quiet nights, when the wind was still, they could hear the faint beating of wings, golden wings, above the palace. The legend of the Dragon Emperor lived on, not as a tale of war or power, but as a story of fire that chose to heal instead of destroy. Because in the end, the Emperor's greatest victory was not the battle he won, it was the heart he changed.